Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone watching from around the world. Off we go with the first episode of Season 4 with the CIES Webinar Series, organized by CIES and the International Center for Sport Studies. These conversations are a collaborative endeavor with the FIFA Master Alumni Association, which is what brings me here. My name is Tanya Heimlich-Ningen. I'm a partner, senior director at BCW Sport, but I'm also a FIFA Master alumni from the 9th edition. I'm logged in today from Switzerland, so I will be starting the conversation here and getting us started. Just a couple of admin points here. So just regarding our organizers, CIES, they are an independent study center here in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. It provides top-level education, research, and consulting services. And you can find some more information about CIES and the CIES Football Observatory, or their educational programs like the FIFA Master and the FIFA CIES Executive Programs, and links in the description of this webinar. Today, we're focusing on conversation on the globalization of sport events. And in particular, we want to discuss the relatively recent expansion of major sport events to new markets. For example, a major example of this trend is, of course, the FIFA World Cup. This edition, 2022, will be in Qatar, which will mark the first time that the FIFA World Cup will take place in the Middle East. Likewise, the FIFA Women's World Cup will be in Oceania, and for the first time ever next year, it will be held in Australia and New Zealand. Additionally, the last 14 years, we've seen multiple editions of the Olympic Games going to new countries like China and Brazil. So with more and more sports incorporating this trend of taking their events, major events, minor events, to new markets, this brings us to the question of today: what impact does the globalization of sport events have now in the short term, but also in the future and in the long term? So to help me answer and to ponder this question, I've invited two fantastic speakers who will tell us about their firsthand experience on the subject. So allow me to introduce you to our fantastic guests. I have Nicholas Rosenberg. Nick is a FIFA Master alumni from the 14th edition. He's also currently working at FIFA. He joined FIFA in 2015. He has been managing the FIFA's bidding process for all tournaments and worked on a number of strategic initiatives for competitions, including expansion of the men's and women's World Cups. He's now the Director of Business Affairs and Strategy, recently promoted. Congratulations, Nick. Which also keeps the remit of bidding and also helps with the initial setup of the World Cup, including strategic planning and business analytics. But more recently, he's managed the host city selection process for the FIFA World Cup. You're, of course, super involved in the tournament preparations. So that is quite the CV, Nick. Welcome.
Thanks.
Glad to have you with us.
Happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. And so we also have our good friend Pierre Lanfranchi. Pierre is, I mean, how do I even go about introducing Pierre Lanfranchi? I mean, what a CV. Pierre is a scientific general coordinator for the International University Network at CIES. He's been there for 16 years. He also has been a research professor in history at the De Montfort University for 28 years, major academic, lots of experience. He's been teaching all around the world. To be honest, I could keep going on and listing all the successes of your academic and professional career there. But Pierre, thank you so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to getting both of your insights on this fantastic discussion today. So As we get focused back onto our topic at hand, globalization of sport events. This concept is not it's nothing new. I mean, it's a trend that we've been seeing going back now at least a decade, but the concept is something that we haven't really been discussing a lot. And I would love to get your insights. Maybe Nick, if you, I'm gonna throw the question over to you, as a firsthand sport administrator, director at FIFA. How has it been? How has your experience been there, dealing with one of the major events, going global? Maybe you can give us a bit of your own personal experience there and your thoughts on this concept of expanding to new markets.
Sure, Tanya. I think in the context of football, it's not necessarily something that's happened in the last few years, this idea of kind of expanding into new markets. It's kind of been a trend that's been going on for maybe a few decades now. We've seen the World Cup move into new markets, over the course of the last 20, 30 years, and move out of maybe the traditional stronghold markets of Europe and South America. However, I do think it's accelerated in the last maybe 10 to 15 years in football. I know that our mantra is to make football truly global, so I'm looking at this first from the football perspective. And as part of that, a very important element is to ensure that, to be able to expand the sport and its reach. We know that, that one of the key elements of that is using the power of our events to inspire new markets and new generations. So we've certainly embodied that. We've taken events to new markets kind of across the board, across our portfolio, whether that's the World Cup going to Russia and then Qatar, and now we'll have this joint event in USA, Canada, and Mexico. Canada never having hosted the event, but then we have a number of first-time hosts also for our other tournaments. We've seen some of our youth tournaments go to new markets like Poland. We've got Indonesia next year for the under 20. In the last few years, we've organised more events in India, which was a market that I think was not really tapped into previously. So, I mean, across the board, we're looking to use the power of our events to continue to globalize our sport. And I think other event organisers are doing, or other rights holders or other international federations are doing the same thing. They're seeing that one of the most effective tools to continue to spread the reach of their sport and encourage the growth of their sport is to use the power of their marquee products. So we've seen, and just to give an example, we know obviously Formula One keeps expanding and they're going into new markets. The Olympics also has taken events to new locations and across many other sports. It's not a purely a football thing or in one or two sports. So I think I think that's one of the themes behind why federations are looking to spread their events, because they know that that's a unique tool in being able to globalize the sports that they administer. And then in terms of also I think we talk about what impact those events have in those markets, not only on increasing participation in that sport or the performance of the national teams at the elite level, but organizing a major event like the World Cup or the Olympics has a huge, broad impact, on the markets in which they're organized. That can be anything from developing a sports events industry that never existed. We've seen a number of cases where, World Cup or Olympics has been organized, and then that's kind of mobilized a new generation of sports industry experts who then go and work on other events or organize other major events in other sports within their market. It can be a broader societal or economic impact within the region. There's a huge broad power behind these events.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great! No, thank you so much for your insights. I mean, you've touched on quite a few topics that we will get back to, social, economic, cultural, these type of insights are also helpful. They also have, there's also a challenge with that as well. While it's very good in terms of spreading the sport, there are some challenges. We'll get back to that in a moment. Pierre, I wanted to throw it over to you to get some of your insights. I mean, of course, you've got 30 plus years of academia behind you, and professional experience. What's your take on this concept of expanding major events to new markets?
Well, when we speak about
Pierre,
expanding,
there we are.
when we speak about expanding to new markets, as Nick just said, it's not a new story. I mean, FIFA has been innovative probably in the last 45 years. When they started with the Under-20 World Cup, it has been a key element for FIFA. They started in Tunisia, then went to Japan, went to Australia, went to the Arab world, and it was a really innovative, and FIFA was very innovative compared to others. We could say the 21st century started with the BRICS domination. The Olympics, 2020 the Olympics and the World Cup with England after.
I think you might be having a little
with
technical problem with Pierre.
Yeah,
we'll just give
I hear you well. With Beijing, with the Olympics in Beijing in 2008, then the World Cup in South Africa in 2010, then with Russia 2018, BRICS, was the big organizer. We had the impression at the start of the 20th and the 21st century that the traditional Western countries were not so keen to organize competition, and we saw that the demand from the Western country was lesser. What we've seen now is a new demand from all the parts. I think we should really not forget, as Nick said, all the other events. I mean, the FIFA has been very, very innovative through the Under-20 World Cup, through the Women's World Cup, through the Futsal World Cup, to touch new countries. I mean, Fiji, Guatemala are very small countries.
Nick, you're still with us, yeah?
I am.
Okay. Pierre, I think we lost your. We lost that last thought. You said, as Nick had mentioned, and then we lost you.
As Nick had mentioned, the other competition of FIFA, not only the World Cup, have been key elements to a real spread of the global sports worldwide. And it has been highly important. The Olympics are changing as well through the Youth Olympics in Argentina, for example. It was a huge event, and it allowed a concept of a mega event, which is not such a huge event like the World Cup or like the Olympics. There are many middle-sized mega events that are very essential when we talk about mega events. Not only thinking on Qatar 2022, but imagining as well what all the other events that have been important in the last 20, 30 years. And, other sports are interesting. Rugby having its World Cup in Japan was a big change in the sport, because rugby, I mean, a French and an Australian can talk about that, but many people in the world don't know rugby. And to see that a new continent, Asia, was involved, it is a big shift for sports, that's for sure.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Pierre. Very insightful indeed. I'm just going to move us along to some of the challenges, because I mean, in both of you mentioned some challenges that have come up over the years. Maybe Nick, do you want to give us a start there on what you have faced? Just from an administrative perspective or an IF view. What do you wish you had known? When you're being faced with the globalization of these sport events going around the world.
Well, I think more on the challenge side rather than the lack of foresight is probably the first point. I think this kind of touches a bit on what Pierre was saying, is that you had maybe a demand from a certain part of the world for a certain period of time. Maybe now we're shifting more to a broader demand. I can say that in the context of the World Cup, even with the expansion, we still have a high level of demand from all markets to host. However, I do think one trend which most organizations, and certainly I think we're included in that, understood from a certain point in time, is that maybe that there's a greater need for organizers to understand the value of what that event brings to their market, and there needs to be a greater level of explanation as to the positive impact. And that also, I think, ties in a bit with this. So in other words, I think countries, and regions now look at events not necessarily with getting the event is all that matters, and then you work out the rest before. Now I think you need to be able to justify what this event is going to bring to your public, and I think there's a greater scrutiny over what these events cost and what they bring, and what infrastructure is needed to organize them, and things like this. So I think we've also needed to be more flexible in our approach and understanding. Okay, for example, we now are a big proponent of co-hosting for some of our major events. We've seen the World Cup's going to three host countries in 26. For Women's World Cup, it's going to 2, Australia and New Zealand. I think having that flexibility about the approach of how events are organized, and allowing also countries and regions to come up with novel ways of developing, a hosting or co-hosting model. I think that's certainly been a recent trend. And I don't think it's only, in the context of football and the World Cup. We've seen it with the Olympics, is also looking now at exploring, regional, or at least an organizing model which is not purely limited to a host city. And I think other events will go in the same direction. So, and also I think we've had to reflect on our requirements, making sure that we maintain a level of requirements that's reasonable for the size of the event, but continue to make the event bigger and better. So that's kind of I think a challenge that we've all faced. I think many of us that have been dealing with that for a while are coming to grips with it quite well. But only time will tell if we still have that demand. But I think that's certainly been a theme of the major sports events. There was this look at these events, and there was probably a critique at one point in time: are these events getting too big? Are they actually bringing a benefit to the markets in which they're organized? I think we've had to reflect on that. I think we have, and we've had to make decisions which I think are appropriate, to make sure the event stays at the level it needs to be, and continues to get better without, increasing the demands on those who are organizing it.
No, that's a very good point, and I see Pierre, he's ready to jump in there. I see he's agreeing with you on quite a few points there. Yeah. And so I'm going to pass the floor to him, but I think one of the things that I did take away from you there is, it's adaptation, right? I mean, you have to always stay relevant. Otherwise, there's so much competition for all sports, not just football, not just the Olympics. Everybody's sort of, trying to make some room in the market, and to be able to stay relevant is extremely important. And you can't just not one size fits all, unfortunately. But enough from me. Pierre, you're the expert.
Yeah, well, I mean, Nick can imagine what I will say about that. Is one risk that we saw over the years is a risk of growing, and the bubble exploded. And we thought that with what's happened with the global warming and with the pandemics has shown that the world of sport have to reflect about what does it mean a big event. What are we talking about in a moment where the society by large is saying, we need to travel a little less. We need to be more focusing on local products, to be more focusing on allowing the local persons to be taking more importance in the events, and that's a new way of understanding global events that is to arrive, and I think that's a fantastic. new issues, not forgetting these elements. Probably what will be the major change, based on the experience we have seen, will be the necessity for international sporting organizations to accept that they have to adapt really their roadmap. For example, cases like building an airport in a city when this airport after the World Cup will not be useful, FIFA has to discuss with local organizers to see, is it really necessary? Do we need to build a new airport in Fortaleza? These are issues where until now it was said by the sporting organization, you signed a contract, it was in the contract, you have to fulfill that argument. Probably now we will have to sit down together with the other actors. I mean, the sporting organizers are not the only actors. There is a larger element to be displayed. The second aspect where I think culturally that is important is to adapt to local realities. Global events, yes, but global event connected to different realities. I mean, the case of Qatar will be very interesting, as was the one in Russia in 2018. You know, we touch realities of worlds where questions very sensitive in the West may be touched very differently. LGBT realities, consumption of alcohol, gender equality. These are issues that may be difficult to tackle in certain elements. I mean, it's interesting what has happened in Russia in 2018 because it was initially very, very positive, notwithstanding that things have changed in the recent months, and FIFA had to behave a bit differently from what they have done earlier. So clearly, it is not to say that everything will be black and white. The world of sports is full of colors, not only simple solution, and that's why Nick has to work all the time and remember the time he had as a FIFA master in his work. I hope you do. To remember the differences in cultures and how we have to deal with differences. And that's the strength of this new elements. And I think economic changes are important. They were, you know, the debate, why does Qatar have the World Cup? People tend to forget when Qatar got the World Cup. It got it at the moment of the economic crisis 12 years ago. And at that time, not many countries were willing to host such an event. And for many banks, it was said, well, you know, Qatar is a safe organizer. They will be able to do the event and not withdraw. Clearly, afterwards, all the negatives regarding Qatar came, but initially it was seen as a very positive potential organizer.
Yeah, just if I could make one comment there, Tanya, I think it's just taking the example of Russia. I think a lot of people came to that event also there were a lot of concerns and reservations about similar issues. And actually what we saw, we discuss what the current context is, but I think there's no denying the event was a major success. And I think that's the power of what these events can bring too. I think sometimes and it's natural, sometimes led through the media, that there's a cynicism towards, because that is the story. It's an easy narrative, and it's a narrative that of controversy that is something which media feeds on. But ultimately, when the event was organized, I think that a lot of people thought, well, will Russia be able to open up to the outside world? You know, it seemed like such a closed place. Will people be accepting of the World Cup, of foreigners traveling into the event? Will people feel safe there? There was all these questions of the event in advance, and then actually the experience. I was there firsthand, so I can say on a personal level, but I think in general as well, the event was wonderful. I think the country was very welcoming of people. I think on an organizational level, it was highly successful. That probably wasn't ever in question, but I think also for foreigners traveling in, they felt very welcome in the country, felt very open. They felt there was an opportunity for people to understand the Russian people in a way they never had before. And I think, there's politics, and then there's people, as the culture. And I think it was a lesson as well that sometimes we keep an open mind about the markets we go into, and they should be given the opportunity to deliver, and then can be judged on things in retrospect. So I think that's also an important thing to keep in mind when looking at going into new markets, fully cognizant of some of the challenges and sensitivities that Pierre raised before.
Absolutely. And if I may, I wanted to just, there's just an interesting parallel on that as we're talking about challenges. Of course, 2026 now, coming up in 4 years. If we look back in the 90s, there was a lot of criticism around moving football, soccer to the US. Is that a good idea? They kind of how do you say, the media criticized FIFA heavily for doing that, saying it was like taking ice hockey to the desert. Is that will we look back in 30 years from now on Qatar and the first time in the Middle East and say, hey, look at, is this now a pivotal moment for football in the Middle East, whereby it's going to expand like crazy in the next 30 years? And again, to your point, Nick, there's always that, media, the cynicism of the media, just kind of saying it's a hot topic now. Let's all jump on board and head in that negative direction, versus maybe there's another, there could be another narrative there going forward, a more positive one.
Even in the context of just taking Qatar as an example, and we don't even need to wait to see the impact the impact it's had on elite football there has been enormous. I think that Qatar as a national team didn't have much of a profile before. They're now an AFC Asian Cup winner. They've I think reached the semi-finals of the Gold Cup as an invited participant. They're a more formidable team. I think we've already seen the impact that can, that organising events like this can have, and we've seen it before. It's not the first time, but just to say that we're already seeing a transformation in the elite level of football within Qatar just over the last decade.
Absolutely, both on the men's and the women's game there as well. Now the women's team, I think, just beat Bahrain recently, which is, it starts to stimulate that grassroots and next generation of football. Just moving along, regarding, I just wanted to get your thoughts, maybe, if there was any, we did talk about some the challenges, but moving from the challenges, is there any lessons do you think that we can take from this? Maybe the audience watching, if they're, if there's event managers, new generation of event managers coming in, what do you think that we can learn from moving around and from this globalization? Maybe Pierre, I don't know. Pierre, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, well, probably the complexity is the most important element. Understanding that thing may change, and that you have to discuss with more people. That we don't arrive anymore with a paper, it will be like that, and that's it, and that's finished. Probably the way international federation, FIFA and IOC at first, did work at the end of the 20th century, the start of the 21st is over. To arrive and to say, you have to accept it, that's it, we don't discuss, it's over. That's a new kind of understanding to adapt and adopt the best political policy. Imagining that things may change from a cultural point of view, that things may change as well from a health point of view. The impact of the pandemics towards what does it mean a big event we still have not reached the final elements toward that, but it changed the idea. The other lessons to be learned from the past is that probably a discussion should be seriously taken with potential candidates about what kind of events is the most adapted to what they can offer. To be partner in a joint event, to be in charge of a less visible event, like, I don't know, a futsal World Cup, or under 17 Women's World Cup, or a Youth Olympics winter. These they are potential competition to be adapted to some countries and some cities, because inside some big countries, many cities are willing to be developed. And lastly, and certainly not the least important, is either the question of what will be the legacy the event will leave locally. And I think one of the very positive changes we've seen in the past is FIFA, IOC, and other organizations are now dealing with specialists of legacy. We have a serious thinking about what the events will bring on the long term. And that's new, because before it was more makeup than a reality, the concept of legacy. So that was a discourse necessary. Now I mean, Nick can tell us about it a bit more, but there is when you have the bidding process, it's not just the legacy part is not something you can solve in a few days. No, you have to really seriously prepare it, and that's a fortunate element.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Pierre's just said. Actually, I had very similar thoughts to the question. So I would agree, maybe starting from the beginning, that the flexibility of, I would come at it from a different way of describing it, but the flexibility of the model of how you actually deliver the event is something that's kind of new. So this idea that you go and, as Pierre said, you impose how this is going to be done, what needs to be met and what doesn't. I think that's kind of something, I think, at least in our organization, I can't speak for the others, but we're certainly shifting away from that. We're looking for models that are flexible to the local conditions. Of course, one of the challenges when you establish a bidding process is that you don't know the market you're going to go into. So when you're defining your requirements, when you're defining your model, you have always this, let's say, this default position of how you think an event should be run, but then you have to tailor it to the local conditions. Otherwise, things are not going to work. I mean, broadly speaking, we've moved to a more FIFA operational-led model. So as opposed to the kind of the traditional LOC model, at least within FIFA. So now we establish local subsidiaries, and I guess the first full iteration of that will be in Australia, New Zealand, and then in USA, Canada, Mexico in 2026, where we'll have, we have these subsidiaries which are kind of lean on the expertise of FIFA and don't reflect kind of a local organizer committee model. However, we'll always have to adapt our structure, I think, to local conditions in terms of what we expect from government support. That also has to be kind of tailored and tempered to what the local market has, what local legislation is. I think we can't. I agree with Pierre. I think we have to have a much better understanding and appreciation ahead of time of, some of these challenges that we'll have to navigate, and be open to that and not only impose. And then in terms of, I totally echo the point around, what events are suitable for what markets. If we want to globalize, we have to acknowledge that there are, let's say, certain markets which are at a certain point in time in their development, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of capability, in terms of, the development of the sport. And we need to find events that are appropriate to that help that market continue to develop. It may mean that they host a mega event later in the future, but it may mean they begin with an event with lower requirements to begin with, lower level of infrastructure, like a futsal or like a beach soccer or an under 17, under 20, and then potentially move to a co-host of a women's or a men's World Cup, or even an individual host. I think that's something which certainly I have had to grapple with quite a bit personally, because we are constantly dealing with bidding processes for all these events. So totally agree with Pierre there. It's about educating also the national federations that are looking to organize events about what might be appropriate, making sure they have an understanding of what the requirements are for hosting these events, and working together to try and find the right types of events for the right markets and making sure they're all successful.
Thanks, Nick. I mean, I think you guys both hit it right on the nail there. I think it's really important to be able to have these discussions. Just, from my end, I mean, I've been working I've been working with bidding and hosting for quite some time as well as part of my career, and being able to have those conversations, not only with the National Federation, but cities hosting countries, regions who want to put forward their a bid, they need to also understand what are they capable of, what fits their own strategy as well. It could be a global major event. It could also be a youth event, as you mentioned, and that actually might do much more. It's still globalization of events, because it's still bringing events around the world, but maybe making sure that actually fits, especially when you have these economic impact studies coming out, even cultural impact, environmental impact, social impact studies. All these studies are coming out now because public sector governments need to justify all the money and investments that they're making for a sport event. It can be at times quite a sensitive topic for these government officials as well. Do you have any experience in dealing with that? I mean, in terms of trying to fit the right, or what do you think about fitting the right events with the right countries? Like, I mean, whether it's the global major events like the FIFA World Cup or the youth events. Do you have any thoughts on that in particular, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, we generally, to be fair, we generally open up. There's a level of, we want our events to be accessible to everyone, right? So we want to give everyone the opportunity to express interest in hosting any of our events. Once we pass that step and we gauge interest, then I do think there's room for dialogue, and certainly we do talk with our member associations about we explain our requirements, we make that a very critical, but ultimately the choice is theirs, we feel, to be part of our process as they are members of our organization. But I think our role is very much to educate on what these events require, what the role of the federation is in that, what it can cost, what it can bring, how much time is needed. Certainly that's the expertise we bring, and we feel our role is to make our federations as informed as possible throughout the process. And I agree. I think in the past also, we have to understand that bidding has a lot of elements to it. It has a key part of it is people having confidence in the process. That the process is fair, equal treating, transparent, and I think a big part of that is actually staying quite arm's length. That's the tendency to go to a process that's more arm's length, because you don't want to be seen to influence too much. You want to give every party equal opportunity to be able to present themselves in the best scenario, evaluate, and then present those options to the decision-making body. So one of those challenges is, as we went through a difficult period. I think we've come out of that better. We've made huge strides in terms of how we've structured our process to be incredibly fair and transparent. We publish everything. We have an audit company that audits us throughout the process. It's in that sense, it's extremely let's say comprehensive. That also means that there are certain moments where we have to manage the extent to which we engage in dialogue on certain elements. So that's the balance we have to find as well, between making sure the process is seen as fair and transparent and not said to be unduly influencing, but also to make sure that our national federations, our member associations, are fully informed and understanding of the process, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, it's actually interesting to hear all the reforms that you've put in place that maybe some people are not aware of. So it's good that you're to be able to hear you and repeat that as well. Even for our audience, and and maybe to the global media at one point, because they like to hear what they want to hear, unfortunately. Pierre, what do you think of that, especially when it comes to cities and regions and matching the right events?
Some countries are really willing to be on the map. Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, to just take one or two of these in the world scene. And sport is a way to show, to show a change in politics, a change in social structure. I mean, the case of Saudi Arabia being one of the most interesting now. They focused 2030 as a new image of the country, and really the importance given to sport is huge. And the importance on the fact that they are able to organize major events. Baku has been candidate for many events in the case of Azerbaijan, and clearly they are easy targets about potential human rights breach, and we are still in a situation where some organization may be problematic. But I like to be an historian for 2 minutes. That's my profession still, and see how major events have changed situation on a positive element, and some of the time it's complicated, but it's still interesting. One of the cases I would like to put forward is the case of South Africa. How much major events have been essential to re-bring South Africa at the end of apartheid again in the world community. The Rugby World Cup, the AFCON, and the World Cup in football have been 3 moments that have been essential to put South Africa on the map again. And you're younger, you didn't leave that period, end of the 90s, early 20s. It was end of the 1990s. It was so important, the place of sport in the birth of the new country, and South Africa has been a very essential element on showing the impact of these mega events in helping the country. There may be debates about the real legacy of the World Cup, but the legacy was big. Many elements in the legacy of the World Cup have been good, and we have to learn out of it how to change some issues. The other case I would put forward is the case of Japan. 1964 in Tokyo. It was a time where it showed, okay, guys, the Second World War is over. And really, the impact of having the Olympics in Tokyo in 64 was really, if one would like to say, when did the Second World War finish? I would say 64 with Tokyo. That's a moment where, the losers of the Second World War, one could say it's a World Cup of 54 for football. When Germany won the World Cup, we are back into the nations. The cultural impact, the impact of being back to the society has been huge in both cases. And that's one of the strengths of sports. That's why maybe I work for 40 years in this field. It is important. So we have to imagine as well how people can dream out of an event. Okay, that it needs to be economically viable. Okay, that it needs to open to new territories. But it has to give to offer the idea to populations that they are part of the world. And I think these 2 cases of Japan and South Africa have been essential. And there is one last element where I learned a lot. It was the Youth Olympics in Argentina, because it showed an alternative success. Unfortunately, it was minimized by the COVID, but the impact of a Youth Olympics, which cost less, which is more, as an ideal event for a country like Argentina, which was not able around that time to spend so much money to organize a World Cup or something like that. But to organize a Youth Olympics was an ideal element to be on the map, to receive an international event, to have a lot of people coming to the country, and to show the passion to sport as well. And it was great because it allowed a lot of schools and school pupils to be part of an international event. And it's part of the essential issues connected to it. And having had the possibility to be present on during the event, I was really, really impressed by it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Pierre, for your insights. As always, very interesting. I'm just weary of time here. I was, if there was one lesson that we could maybe, if you could think about it, if there was one thing that we could kind of leave as a final thought from each of your sides on this expansion. I know we covered so much. I mean, we covered, the bidding process to economic, to social, to cultural. If there was something that we, to how do you say, to leave a lasting thought here about this major events going into new markets, the globalization of sport and sport events, what would you like to say, let's say to our audience, if there was something that you wanted to kind of leave as a last remark here on this topic? Nick, I'm gonna. I know it's a heavy question, isn't it? But maybe Nick, you want to
We've
start?
covered so many points, so it's hard to pick one. If I was to take a kind of theme of some of the points I mentioned, looking at it from my perspective as on the side of the event owner, in essence, it'd probably be that I think, we're in a world now where on both sides, whether it's the organizer, whether it's the country or the city applying, I think just being really flexible and adaptive to whatever the existing context is at the time is really important. So being aware and, that things can change rapidly, that the sports industry is changing rapidly, that, that all of these elements and things are moving super quickly, much quicker than they used to in a way. I think we need to be aware of what's going on around us, understanding of what our stakeholders need, understanding of how our event is changing, and be quick to respond to that, to make sure that our event's always kind of fit for purpose for what's kind of going on, and making sure that that's still relevant and that is a key ingredient to its success. Then the other part is we can't ever kind of neglect the fact that it's important to everyone to understand how these events have or don't have an impact. We need to be explaining that as an organizer to our market. Because I think we're now in a world where so many things have happened. There's a lot of challenges around the world which are non-sporting. Mm-hmm. And I think people have a lot more going on maybe than what was going on before. And I think it's important that we continue to communicate what the impact of these major events are wherever we take them. Yeah. That would probably be my take all.
Yeah,
I love it. That's really good. I liked your fit for purpose. That's a good word there, or good words there. Especially from a federation and seeing how fast things are going these days. Being fit for purpose is extremely important. Pierre?
Yeah, well,
you.
In 1990, I was part of a cultural committee of the World Cup in Italy. And we went to interview big writers and others what they thought about the World Cup. And one was Alberto Moravia, a famous writer. And they say, I hate the World Cup. And nobody cares about the millions of Italians who see this World Cup as a nuisance. Everybody will only speak about football. You will have the price of hotels will be doubling. The price of housing in the city will be increasing. I think that's an element. We should no more forget the people we don't care about the sporting major events. How these sporting major events are adapted to people who don't live in the cities but in the countryside, the elderly people, the people who come from migrating community. That's important. starting to imagine that not everybody loves sports. Not everybody will take advantages of having these events. You know, the price of housing and renting in the cities is an issue to tackle. It's really a terrible issue. I mean, if we see examples that you're Canadian, Tanya, and the people of Montreal remember the Olympics of '76 because they paid for that their taxes for 40 years. People in Athens, yes, they get a fantastic airport. Yes, they get less congestion, but they got other problems. The people in Cape Town, the stadium that was built there doesn't help in any way because and that's the father of an alumni of the FIFA Master of the World running it for a while, which I discussed with, and he said it was too big. It was not adapted to the reality of the city. And clearly we need to think on that, to use these events to allow people to have a better life. And last but not least, fun. This event must be meant for fun, not for money. That's much more important. Never forget this idea that it's not just the economic impact that costs, but the fun of the people. That the people have a joy to go there, enjoy it, and that's if we forget it. And I'm sure that Nick doesn't forget it. My memory
I still remember Russia.
Is able to have fun. Absolutely.
Excellent. All right.
So I think that's my main comments about what we should not forget.
I like that. We have to make it fun. That's what it is, right? Sport it's different than any other industry. That's what makes it special, right? Leaving that special legacy. I mean, to be honest, I remember Vancouver still, and that was my first year living in abroad, but I went home for the Olympics, and that was everything. So it was absolutely, I couldn't care less about the economic impact. I enjoyed it so much, my time there. But on that note, I want to thank our speakers, our guest speakers. You guys are absolutely fantastic. Your insights, as always, are amazing. I will just close out by just again saying what an enlightening discussion that was. Of course, we could keep talking for hours and hours on end about this topic. It's a personal favorite topic of mine. But unfortunately, our time has come to an end. And I do apologize. I think there were a couple of questions from our audience, but I have to stick to the time, so my apologies. But maybe offline we could take up some of your questions at another moment. If you have enjoyed this session, you are encouraged to also review the library of videos through the other 3 sessions that we've had before. That also feature some other FIFA Master alumni. And you can also have a look on the FIFA Master Alumni YouTube channel. This is streamed there, but also our Latin America webinar seminars are there as well. The next webinar session for CIES series will be in about a month. We're just in the process of finalizing the date there. And we'll, of course, have some very interesting speakers and another interesting topic on hand for you. So please stay tuned for those sessions. And with that, I'm going to close, and I wish everyone a continued wonderful day or evening or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. A big thank you to Nick, to Pierre. Thank you guys for your time. I wish you guys a nice rest of your afternoon, and I thank everybody for coming today. Thank you so much, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.